In a quiet suburban neighborhood, a young girl's world shatters when her loyal German Shepherd is shot by police during what they call a routine check. But her father isn't just any man. He's a former Delta Force commander with a past as dangerous as it is disciplined. When the system protects the officers, he begins uncovering a web of corruption that reaches far beyond two badges. Will truth or power prevail? If this story moves you, please like the video and subscribe for more powerful tales of justice and courage. Shadow moved like a shadow, should quiet certain always at Emily Carter's left knee. Maple Ridge was the kind of suburban street where porch flags fluttered above tidy flower beds, and kids chalked hopscotch grids that lasted until the next rain. Emily, 12, and slight, in a denim jacket, liked to count the blue mailboxes on the long loop, while her dad Jack was away on training. The counting made the hours feel less hollow. She touched the little free library at the corner like it was a checkpoint in a race only she and Shadow understood. Mrs. Wilson's screen door eased open with its familiar squeak, and the white-haired widow lifted a hand. "Afternoon, sweetheart." Emily smiled back. Shadow's tail brushed her calf, a steady metronome of reassurance. He had been her anchor on stormy nights, a warm weight at the foot of the bed when the house seemed too large and the silence too loud. Jack had taught her cues, heel sit, stay spoken like calm promises, and the dog had woven those promises into muscle memory. The patrol car appeared the way service trucks do when a streetlight flickers slow, measuring unhurried. It rolled to the curb 30 feet ahead, engine humming over the distant hiss of sprinklers. Two officers stepped out, adjusting belts out of habit, not menace. The older man's nameplate read, Callahan. The younger's read, Miller. Emily stopped, because that was what you did when adults in uniforms asked questions, and Shadow sat with the quiet dignity of a dog who understands order. Afternoon, Callahan said, tone professional. "You live on this block?" Emily nodded. "Yes, sir." "Maple Street. We're just walking." Miller watched Shadow with a narrow skepticism that didn't quite match the easy afternoon. "We've had a couple calls about suspicious activity, a loose animal maybe. Big dog for a young lady. You sure you can control him?" Emily kept her voice level the way Jack had taught her. Calm hands. Calm leash. Calm dog. "He's trained, sir." "He heals. He's gentle." She slid the brass tag around to show the name and address. Shadow leaned forward the small inch dogs do when their person crouches, a natural guard instead of a challenge, his rib cage, a bracket between the girl and the strangers. "Back," Emily said, soft as a breath, and Shadow obeyed, easing the space open again. Miller's hand hovered near his holster, a reflex that made several things in the air tighten at once. Mrs. Wilson, halfway down her porch steps, now paused and tapped her phone awake, not out of excitement but habit. Years of living alone had taught her that sometimes you write things down, and sometimes the thing you write down has to be a picture. She steadied her elbow on the rail to quiet the slight tremor in her wrist. Mr. Alvarez across the street set his hedge trimmers on the lawn and watched, uncertain how close a neighbor is supposed to be to a moment like this. "We'd like to check the tags," Callahan said, as if repetition could make the moment smaller. Emily lifted the collar again, and Shadow, thinking the movement meant get ready, shifted a fraction forward and then stopped when she breathed his name. For a heartbeat, the entire afternoon fit inside that inch of sidewalk, the sprinkler ticking, the choir practice carrying faintly from the church on 3rd, the open question of what each person believed they were seeing. Dogs advancing. Miller said, quick and clipped as if narrating for a camera none of them could see. "He's not," Emily answered, but the sentence had no time to land. The sound cracked the street in two one universe before it one after. Shadow folded as if something invisible had pressed a hinge. The leash went slack and hot in Emily's hand. She dropped to her knees without remembering the movement, the concrete biting through denim. Jack's voice lived in her muscle memory. "Steady pressure if there's bleeding. Keep your voice low. Let him see your face." Shadow, she whispered. Because names tether things, even when the tether is thin. The dog's eyes found her trusting, even in confusion. He tried to lift his head. She steadied it with both palms and felt the weight she would always remember. Miss, step back. Miller ordered, breath, high words official. The animal was aggressive. Aggressive. The word felt foreign in the mouth of this block wrong-sized for the porch pumpkins and chalk dust, and a dog who had learned to match a little girl's stride. Callahan spoke into his radio with the professional cadence of a form being filled. Canine aggressive shots fired scene contained. The phrases sounded like they belonged to paperwork, not to a sidewalk where a child pressed her cheek to a dog's shoulder. Neighbors formed that uncertain crescent people make when they want to help and fear they will make things worse. A mother scooped a toddler onto her hip. A teenager lifted a hand halfway and then dropped it caught in the quiet magnet of the moment. Mrs. Wilson came closer until she was near enough to speak without raising her voice. I saw she said to Emily, not to the officers. I've got it on my phone. Emily nodded the motion, small and stunned. Shadow's tail tapped once, a courtesy goodbye he had given 1,000 times at the end of a walk, and then stilled. Emily felt the stillness travel into her, a cold river moving under the surface. Callahan shifted his weight, eyes flicking from girl to dog to porch. We're sorry for your loss, he said, and in the space after the sentence, the phrase sounded practiced, built for hospital hallways and folded flags, not for a curb, a dozen doors from a lemonade stand. Animal Control's white van turned onto the block. Emily stayed kneeling until someone touched her shoulder and asked if she wanted water. She did not. She wanted to rewind 5 minutes to reteach a cue she had already taught perfectly to choose a shorter route. She stood because she was asked to fingers closing around the empty loop of leather as if it were a hand. By sunset, the official statement was already moving through the neighborhood like news always does. Now push alerts group texts a post on the police department's page. Officers responded to reports of a potentially aggressive canine. During a routine safety check, the animal advanced. An officer discharged his service weapon. No residents injured. Incident remains under review. The words stacked themselves neatly, small bricks, mortared with caution. Inside living rooms, neighbors replayed what they had seen and felt the gap between the sentences and the afternoon. Mr. Alvarez told his wife he had watched the dog sit. The teenager down the block uploaded a few seconds of shaky video and then took it down uneasy about adding heat to a moment already burning. Mrs. Wilson, who had filmed a minute at the center of it all, set her phone face down on the coffee table and folded her hands, deciding to call Jack's sister first. We'll need to let her father know, she told Emily, who sat on the porch steps with her jacket balled in her lap, eyes fixed on the dark line where grass met concrete. We'll do it together, dear. Emily nodded, and for the first time since the shot, she let her shoulders sag into the kind of tired that comes when a day asks too much of a child. In the street, chalk dust lifted at the edge of a breeze and disappeared as if the hopscotch squares had decided to step off the pavement and leave the counting to someone else. Jack Carter returned home 2 days after the incident, arriving from a short training assignment earlier than planned after a call from his sister Laura and a trembling voice message left by Mrs. Wilson. He entered the modest white house on Maple Street and found Emily seated at the kitchen table, her jacket still folded in her lap, eyes distant as if staring through the wall. Shadow's leash hung on the hook near the door, empty, the brass tag catching a thin line of afternoon light. Jack crouched beside his daughter, his large hands resting lightly on her shoulders, and asked softly what had happened. She could only whisper Shadow's name and bury her face against his shirt. Laura, who had stayed the past 2 nights, filled in the details. The officers, the shot, the neighbors, the video clip saved on a phone across the street. Jack listened without interruption, his jaw set in a way that meant words would come later, carefully chosen. That evening he filed the formal complaint attaching Mrs. Wilson's footage and contact information for every neighbor who had seen the confrontation. He believed, at least for a day, that the system would correct itself when given evidence. The next morning, he wore his uniform jacket, though he was on leave, and walked into the precinct with a folder under his arm. He delivered his statement to Internal Affairs, speaking in the steady cadence of a soldier used to briefing commanding officers. The investigator, a man with glasses and a crisp tie, took notes without visible reaction and assured him the matter would be reviewed swiftly. Jack returned home, holding on to that assurance the way a man grips a rope over water, repeating to himself that order would emerge from disorder. 3 days later, an envelope arrived by courier. The letter inside, heavy with official stamps and the weight of bureaucracy, stated in careful language that after review the officer's actions had been determined to be consistent with department protocol and justified given perceived threat. Jack read it twice, then folded it back into the envelope. He carried it to the porch swing where Emily sat with her knees drawn to her chest. He did not show her the letter, only set it beside him on the slats, because the words on the page would confirm what her eyes already knew, that Shadow was gone, and those responsible would not be held accountable, at least not yet. Emily's silence stretched across the week like a shadow of its own. She no longer counted mailboxes or paused at the free library corner. She left food untouched on her plate and startled at the sound of tires on the street outside. At night, Jack heard her stir and whisper Shadow's name as though calling him might call back safety. One evening, she awoke screaming, clutching her hands as if they still pressed against his wound. Jack rushed in, gathered her in his arms, and realized with a hollow weight that his daughter was reliving the loss over and over in dreams she could not escape. Laura urged him to contact a counselor, reminding him that trauma in children can deepen if unspoken. Jack agreed, though he also understood that what Emily needed most was the sense that someone strong enough would stand beside her until the world steadied again. The family attended a small service in their backyard where Mrs. Wilson, Mr. Alvarez, and a few neighbors gathered quietly. Emily placed Shadow's collar on the garden bench while Laura read a simple prayer. Jack said little, his voice too tight, but afterward he carried his daughter back inside and promised he would not let Shadow's memory be written off as collateral damage in a report. He knew what collateral meant. He had seen it in war zones where civilians paid the price for miscalculated decisions. He would not let that word take root in his daughter's life. Meanwhile, the official narrative spread. Local news outlets carried a short statement released by the department officers, responded appropriately to an aggressive canine during a routine patrol. The matter has been reviewed and closed. Comment sections echoed with divided voices. Some insisted large dogs were unpredictable. Others pointed out the neighbor's testimony. Mrs. Wilson's video clip, shared discreetly with Laura, showed only fragments, the leash slack Emily crouching the dog, positioned defensively but not lunging. To Jack, it was enough to contradict the report, yet Internal Affairs had dismissed it as inconclusive. The neatness of the closure angered him in a quiet, focused way. Jack watched Emily withdraw further. She stopped walking to school, asking instead to ride with Laura, and even then she kept her gaze fixed on the passing houses as if searching for threats. She no longer touched the hook where Shadow's leash had hung. One afternoon, Jack found her in her room with the brass tag clutched in her fist, whispering to it like a secret. He sat beside her and spoke gently about how Shadow had done his job standing between her and danger, even if the danger was imagined by others. Emily listened, but did not respond, her silence more eloquent than words. Jack recognized the signs he had seen soldiers carry grief in similar ways, shoulders drawn inward, voices shuddered. Late that night, Jack opened the envelope again, reading the phrases that seemed designed to erase reality. He thought of the promises he had made to Emily after her mother's passing, that he would protect her, that he would tell her the truth, that he would not let her carry pain alone. The letter made him realize those promises now required more than comfort. They required action. He set the envelope down and began to map what action might look like. Not anger without direction, but deliberate steps. He listed the names of neighbors willing to speak, the timestamps from Mrs. Wilson's video, the inconsistencies in the officer's statements. Each note was written in block letters, disciplined like a field report. The soldier in him understood preparation was the counterweight to despair. Emily woke again before dawn, walking into the kitchen barefoot and pale. She asked if Shadow had suffered. Jack knelt to meet her eyes and told her Shadow had trusted her until his last breath, and that trust was the gentlest gift he had ever known. Emily nodded, though tears streaked silently. Jack lifted her into his arms and felt the fragile weight of what the system's decision had done, not only killed a dog, but shaken a child's belief that justice was possible. He carried her back to bed, whispering that he would not let the story end with that letter. By morning, Jack had already called Laura to arrange a meeting with an attorney friend who specialized in civil rights cases. He contacted Mrs. Wilson to ask if she would preserve the original video. He wrote a letter to the department requesting all dispatch records from that day. Each act was deliberate, a way of telling Emily without words that he had not surrendered. He did not share the details with her yet. She needed to heal without the burden of tactics. But in his mind, the path forward had shifted from waiting for the system to act to ensuring it could no longer ignore the truth. Jack Carter sat at the dining table with a legal pad spread before him, the paper lined with careful notes written in his strong block lettering. He had recorded witness names, the timeline of the incident, and questions he intended to direct toward the department. Yet even with the preparation, he felt the familiar tightness of frustration pressing against his ribs. The official response had closed doors with the finality of a lock clicking into place. Emily sat quietly in the living room, with Laura coloring in silence, her crayons moving without words. Jack watched her for a moment and recognized the posture of a child who carried a weight far heavier than any book bag. He turned back to the pad, vowing that weight would not be hers alone. Later that evening, as he stepped onto the porch to clear his mind, he noticed a figure lingering near the edge of the yard. The man was young, his uniform jacket unbuttoned, his stance uncertain. Jack's instinct sharpened, but the man raised a hand quickly in reassurance. "Mr. Carter," he said quietly, glancing down the street to be sure no one else was near. "My name is Officer Daniel Brooks. I need to speak with you privately." Jack studied him in the dim porch light, the discipline of years in Delta Force reminding him to measure words before speaking. "Come inside," he said, motioning to the kitchen where Laura and Emily would not overhear. Daniel stepped across the threshold, removing his cap, and sat with visible tension at the small table. He clasped his hands, knuckles pale, then met Jack's eyes. "I was at the station when the report on Shadow's shooting was filed," he began. "I read the draft before it went into the system. What's in there is not what happened." Jack's gaze held steady, a soldier's patience waiting for detail. Daniel continued, his voice low. "The report says the dog lunged, that it showed teeth and came at Officer Miller. I watched Mrs. Wilson's video. That's not what I saw, and it's not what the witnesses said. But when I raised concerns, I was told the draft had already been signed off by my sergeant. He told me to keep quiet if I wanted a career." Jack's jaw tightened, but his voice remained measured. "You're telling me the official record was falsified?" Daniel nodded, shame flickering across his expression. "Yes, sir. I should have spoken louder. But the truth is, the department does not tolerate dissent. My Sergeant Lieutenant Pearson made it very clear. He said that questioning the report would mark me as disloyal, and in this department, loyalty is the only thing that matters." He drew a slow breath. He implied that if I pressed the issue, I'd find myself reassigned, maybe even facing charges for insubordination. I have a young family, and I hesitated. But after seeing your daughter's face at the station and reading the official conclusion, I couldn't stay silent. Jack leaned forward, his tone deliberate. "Why come to me now?" Daniel hesitated, then spoke with conviction. "Because I believe what happened on that sidewalk was wrong. And if I don't stand up now, I'll never forgive myself. I also know you won't let this go, and maybe I can help in ways others won't." Jack considered the risk this young officer was taking. He knew the cost of breaking rank in tightly bound institutions. He had seen soldiers punished not for mistakes in combat, but for speaking against flawed decisions. He recognized the same fear in Daniel's eyes, the fear of losing not only a career, but a community of peers. Jack asked the questions carefully, gathering every detail: who signed the report, how quickly it had been filed, whether anyone outside the immediate circle had seen the evidence before it was closed. Daniel answered steadily, though his voice trembled when he repeated Lieutenant Pearson's warning. He said, "Remember where your loyalty lies if you want to keep your badge." I understood what that meant. Jack wrote the words on his pad with deliberate strokes. Each fact was another thread in the net he was weaving. Emily padded into the kitchen, quietly rubbing her eyes, and stopped short when she saw the uniform. Jack placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. "This is Officer Brooks," he said gently. "He's here to help us." Emily looked at the man for a long moment before nodding slightly and retreating back to the living room. Daniel's expression softened. "She deserves better than what she's been given," he murmured. Jack answered firmly, "She will get it." Before leaving, Daniel handed Jack a slip of paper with his private phone number. "If you need testimony, I'll give it. Just know the risk is real. Pearson has ruined careers for less." Jack accepted it, understanding both the value and the fragility of what the young officer offered. He saw in Daniel the possibility of an ally inside the walls that had closed around them. After Daniel left, Jack sat alone at the table, the house quiet except for the muffled sound of Laura reading to Emily. He turned the slip of paper in his hand and thought of seeds. In combat zones, he had seen tiny acts of resistance grow into movements. Perhaps this young officer's conscience was the seed that could break the soil of silence here. But Jack also understood seeds required protection from those who would crush them before they could sprout. He resolved to guard Daniel's trust as carefully as he guarded his daughter's healing. That night he added a new column to his legal pad labeled Allies. Under it, he wrote one name, Officer Daniel Brooks. He closed the pad and set it beside the envelope from Internal Affairs. One represented a door slammed shut, the other a door just beginning to open. Jack rose and looked out the window at the quiet street, noting the patrol car parked 2 blocks away. The presence was not coincidence. He recognized surveillance when he saw it. He whispered a promise to himself that the truth would not be buried beneath paperwork and silence. The knock came late in the morning, just as Jack Carter was clearing breakfast dishes from the table while Laura helped Emily prepare for school. It was not the friendly knock of a neighbor or the hurried tap of a delivery driver. It was steady, deliberate, the sound of someone arriving with authority. Jack opened the door to find a woman in a pressed suit jacket holding a clipboard and a leather bag. She introduced herself as Diane Mercer from Child and Family Services. Her expression was courteous but carried the unmistakable weight of official business. "Mr. Carter," she said, "we've received a report expressing concern about the stability of your home environment, particularly regarding your mental health as a veteran and the well-being of your daughter. I need to speak with you and conduct a brief assessment." Jack stood in the doorway for a moment, measuring his response, then stepped aside to let her in, because refusing would only confirm whatever suspicions had been seeded. They sat at the dining table, the same place where Daniel Brooks had shared his warning days earlier. Diane asked questions in a professional tone, inquiring about Jack's deployments, his adjustment to civilian life, his coping methods for stress. Jack answered calmly, his voice steady but edged with awareness that each word might be written down in a way that could be turned against him. Laura entered midway through the conversation, her legal training evident in the precision of her own questions. What triggered this visit? Who filed the report? Diane replied that the referral was anonymous, citing protocol that protected sources. She assured them it was standard procedure, yet Jack noted the timing. It came only days after he filed complaints and after Daniel's quiet visit. When Diane asked to speak with Emily, Jack refused, gently but firmly explaining that his daughter was still traumatized and had a counseling appointment scheduled. Laura reinforced the point, citing Emily's rights and the necessity of parental presence during any interview. Diane made notes, her pen scratching across the form, then scheduled a follow-up visit. Before leaving, she offered a polite smile, though her eyes betrayed something less neutral. As the door closed, Jack exhaled and looked at Laura. "They are trying to build a case against me," he said. Laura nodded grimly. "It's a classic move. If they cannot silence you through procedure, they will question your capacity as a parent." The following day, Emily returned home from school looking shaken. She sat at the kitchen counter, fiddling with the strap of her backpack. When Jack asked what happened, she hesitated before answering. "2 police officers came to school today," she whispered. "They wanted to talk to me in the library. The principal said they needed your permission first, but they kept asking." Jack's chest tightened. He asked for names. Emily swallowed and said quietly, "It was the same ones. Officer Callahan and Officer Miller." Jack drove immediately to Riverview Elementary and requested a meeting with Principal Whitaker. The principal, a woman with silver hair and a steady gaze, welcomed him into her office. She confirmed the visit, explaining that the officers had arrived unannounced, insisting they were following up on threats allegedly connected to the shooting incident. Whitaker told them school policy required parental consent for questioning minors, especially in sensitive matters, and she had refused access. They were not pleased, she added, her expression firm. "But I will not allow intimidation in this school." Jack thanked her, though beneath his gratitude was a rising current of anger carefully contained. Back at home, Jack sat with Laura to discuss the implications. It was clear now the officers and those shielding them were escalating. First, they discredited his complaint through internal affairs. Then they sent social services to probe his stability. Now they had attempted to interrogate his daughter without him present. Each step carried the same signature, a strategy of pressure designed to make him withdraw. Jack instead felt his resolve harden. He remembered the young officer Brooks and the courage it took to come forward. If Brooks could risk his career, Jack could withstand pressure meant to weaken him. That night, Emily awoke again from a nightmare, this time insisting she had heard the sound of Shadow's collar jingling in the hallway. Jack sat beside her bed, holding her hand, until she drifted back to sleep. He realized the attacks on his credibility were not only against him, but against the fragile process of his daughter's healing. The system was pressing on the very wound that had yet to close. He decided the next phase of his effort would not only involve collecting evidence but also preparing to defend against retaliatory moves. He would need allies both inside and outside the department, and he would need to protect Emily from further intrusion. Laura suggested contacting a child psychologist, officially ensuring documentation of Emily's trauma. Jack agreed, knowing that recorded professional testimony could counter any claim about an unstable home. He also began drafting a timeline that included the social worker's visit and the attempted questioning at school. Each entry was dated, each detail precise. Years of military habit made the process methodical. He treated it as intelligence gathering because, in truth, that was what it had become. By the end of the week, Jack had assembled a binder that now contained his complaint, Mrs. Wilson's video neighbor statements, Daniel Brooks's discreet testimony, and notes on the escalating retaliation. He knew the binder alone would not guarantee justice, but it was becoming a shield, a record too dense to be erased easily. Emily peeked into the study while he worked, asking if he was busy. Jack closed the binder and placed it on the shelf, then joined her on the porch swing. He listened as she spoke softly about missing Shadow on their evening walks. Jack promised that every step he took now was for her to honor the loyalty of the dog that had protected her and to restore her sense of safety. Emily leaned against him, small and tired, but in her silence he felt her belief that he would keep his promise. Jack Carter sat at his desk late into the night, the binder of documents open beside him. He had mapped the escalation step by step, The internal affairs dismissal, the social worker's visit, the attempted interrogation at Emily's school. Each move followed a pattern: pressure, intimidation, discrediting. Jack knew enough from his years of service to recognize that the next step would be direct confrontation. He also knew confrontation could be turned into opportunity if planned correctly. Instead of waiting for the next knock at the door, he would prepare his home the way he once prepared a forward operating base, with observation documentation and layers of defense. The next morning, he visited a hardware store 2 towns over, purchasing small security cameras, motion sensors, and a central recorder. He paid in cash, unwilling to leave a trail that might alert anyone watching his finances. At home, he installed the devices with careful precision, wiring them into smoke detectors, vents, and decorative frames. Each camera had a wide angle, each microphone tested for clarity. Laura assisted, impressed by the thoroughness, while Emily remained unaware, focused instead on her schoolwork and counseling sessions. Jack's goal was not only to protect, but also to create undeniable evidence should Callahan and Miller decide to cross his threshold again. Within days, his preparation proved prescient. A patrol car lingered on the block, its engine idling for long minutes before moving on. Neighbors whispered that the same vehicle circled at irregular hours. Jack logged the times in his binder, his calm precision masking the unease of constant surveillance. Then, one Friday afternoon, the confrontation arrived. A sharp knock rattled the door, followed by the voices of Callahan and Miller. Jack opened calmly, his demeanor measured, his body language relaxed. "Officers," he said. "What can I do for you?" They stepped inside without waiting for invitation. Miller's shoulders squared in challenge, Callahan trailing with the calculating eyes of a man determined to control the exchange. The cameras recorded every movement. Jack motioned toward the living room, sitting in a chair while the officers stood over him. "We've heard you've been making accusations," Callahan began. "Following us, filing complaints, trying to stir trouble where there is none." Miller added, his tone sharp. "That sort of behavior can be considered harassment. Some might even call it a threat against law enforcement." Jack kept his voice even. "I've filed complaints with evidence. That is my right as a citizen." He folded his hands, letting silence stretch. The officers filled it with words as he expected. Callahan leaned closer. "You think your military record makes you untouchable? You think people will believe you over 2 decorated officers with years in this department?" Miller's hand pressed against the back of the chair, looming. "Your daughter already made a threat, remember? Said her father would make us pay. Those words can carry weight in court." Jack raised his eyes slowly. "She is 12 years old and grieving. Any father would defend his child's words under those circumstances." His calmness unsettled them. Miller pushed further. "We could charge you with obstruction, with intimidation. All it takes is our testimony. The system trusts us, not you." Callahan smirked. "Internal Affairs has already cleared us. That should tell you where loyalty lies." Every sentence captured on camera deepened the trap. Jack asked quietly, "Are you saying the official report does not reflect the truth?" Callahan shifted, but Miller snapped. "The truth is what goes into the report. You'd be wise to remember that." Jack let the words hang, then stood slowly. "I think this conversation is over. Unless you have a warrant, you should leave." The officers exchanged a glance, frustrated by his composure. Callahan finally gestured toward the door, muttering that this was not the end. Miller added, "You're making dangerous choices, Carter. For yourself and for your girl." They stepped out the door, closing with a final thud. Jack remained still, counting the seconds until their vehicle pulled away. Then he moved to the small control panel he had installed in the study. The footage was perfect, crisp video, clear audio, every incriminating phrase preserved. He copied it to multiple drives, labeling one for Laura, one for Officer Brooks, and one for an attorney outside their county. That evening, Laura watched the recording with narrowed eyes. "They incriminated themselves," she said. "They admitted the report is malleable, admitted to threats, admitted to using Emily's words against her. This is stronger than anything we've had so far. Jack nodded. It's not enough yet, but it's a turning point. They believe intimidation is their weapon. We'll make it their weakness. Emily entered the room with a drawing in her hands, unaware of the storm gathering in the background. Jack took the paper, a sketch of Shadow standing beneath stars, and told her it was beautiful. She smiled faintly, the first hint of light he had seen in days, before heading back to her room. After she left, Jack turned to Laura. Now we have leverage. The question is how to use it without putting Emily in more danger. Laura tapped the binder. Carefully, but decisively. The more they push, the more evidence we'll have. Jack agreed, but he also knew escalation carried risk. Callahan and Miller would not retreat quietly once they realized the power of their own words had been captured. He looked out the window at the dark street, imagining the patrol car returning, the cycle of intimidation continuing. Yet for the first time since Shadow's death, he felt the momentum shift. The hunter in him recognized the moment when prey had walked willingly into a trap. The footage from Jack's hidden cameras sat on 3 separate drives locked in his desk, each copy a safeguard against the disappearance of truth. He knew what he possessed could shift the balance, but he also knew such evidence would draw retaliation from people invested in silence. Laura urged caution, reminding him that escalation without allies could leave them exposed. Jack listened but kept scanning the horizon of possibility, aware that sooner or later someone inside the department would notice the cracks forming. That moment arrived on a Tuesday evening when Jack received an unmarked envelope in his mailbox. Inside was a folded piece of paper bearing only a phone number and a time. The note was unsigned, but the deliberate neatness of the handwriting suggested discipline, not randomness. At precisely the time indicated, Jack dialed the number from a disposable phone he kept for emergencies. A calm female voice answered. "Commander Carter," she said, using the title from his service years. "This is Captain Angela Richardson. I cannot speak long, but you need to know something important." Jack's hand tightened around the phone. "Go ahead," he said. Angela's tone carried authority laced with caution. "You believe your struggle is with Officers Callahan and Miller alone. It is not. They are shielded by a network of colleagues and superiors who have a vested interest in keeping them protected. You are pushing against more than 2 men. You are pushing against a culture that defends itself at all costs." Jack listened, absorbing each word. Angela continued. "I have seen the complaints over the years. Patterns of excessive force reports that vanish citizens intimidated into silence. You are not the first, but you may be the first with the skill and determination to push back effectively. That is why I am reaching out." Quietly. Jack asked how she knew him. A pause followed before Angela said, "I review personnel files thoroughly. I also know Callahan's history. You should too." Jack's instincts sharpened. What history, he asked. Angela exhaled. Before he joined the department, Mark Callahan served in the Army. Afghanistan 2008. He was under your command. Do you remember the disciplinary action filed against him? Jack's memory shifted back to a desert evening, a patrol gone wrong. Civilians caught in crossfire. He remembered a young sergeant who ignored clear rules of engagement, whose reckless aggression endangered not only civilians but his own unit. Jack had filed the report that led to Callahan's discharge. He closed his eyes as the pieces aligned with sickening clarity. Angela's voice lowered. "He never forgave you. He blames you for ending his military career. When he saw your name on the complaint, I believe his personal grudge merged with the department's broader protection culture. That makes him dangerous in ways beyond ordinary corruption." Jack absorbed the revelation in silence. The enemy was not faceless. It was personal, rooted in history, carrying the bitterness of years. Angela warned him further. "I cannot protect you openly. If my communication is discovered, my career will end. But I can advise. Document everything. Share evidence outside the county, not just within. They will attempt to undermine you by questioning your stability, your loyalty, your daughter's safety. They may already have made moves you haven't seen yet. Jack thought of the social workers' visit the patrol cars outside the attempt at school. They already have, he said. Angela's reply was grim. Then expect more. But understand this corruption thrives on isolation. If you connect with the right allies, you can expose them. If you stand alone, they will bury you. Jack thanked her, recognizing the risk she had taken. Before ending the call, Angela added one final warning. Do not underestimate Callahan's desire for revenge. This is not only about protecting himself. For him, it is personal closure. Watch him closely. That night, Jack sat in the study staring at Shadow's collar on the shelf. The revelation reframed everything. What began as tragedy had become entangled with the soldier's old decision, one he had made to protect innocence, but that now returned like a blade in the dark. He considered Emily asleep down the hall, her breathing shallow but steady, unaware that her father's past had reached into her present. Jack knew this meant Callahan's pursuit would not end with intimidation. It would escalate until he believed his grudge settled. Laura joined him, and he explained what he had learned. She listened, then said, "This means we can establish motive, not just misconduct. Personal vendetta is powerful evidence when connected to abuse of power." Jack nodded but felt the gravity. Evidence might expose corruption, but vengeance drove unpredictability. He would need to anticipate not just procedural tactics, but personal retaliation. The following day, he called Daniel Brooks, arranging a meeting at a quiet cafe out of town. Daniel listened with wide eyes as Jack explained Callahan's past. "That makes sense," Daniel said quietly. "He talks sometimes about how the army betrayed him. He never says your name, but the anger is always there." Jack leaned closer. "That anger is now aimed at me, and by extension, at Emily. You need to be careful too, Daniel. You've already risked much by speaking up." Daniel nodded, though his expression showed unease. "I'll keep my head down, but I'll stand by my word." Jack returned home with the recognition that the conflict was entering a new phase. It was no longer only about justice for Shadow. It was about dismantling a network that thrived on silence and confronting a man whose resentment stretched back over a decade. Jack's military training whispered strategies: anticipate, prepare, counter. But this battlefield was his home, and the casualty risk was his daughter. He resolved that his next moves would balance precision with protection. The morning after his meeting with Daniel Brooks, Jack Carter noticed an unfamiliar envelope tucked into his mailbox, stamped with the seal of the local district office. Inside lay a formal notice advising him that allegations had been filed claiming he had made threats against 2 officers. The document cited concerns for public safety and indicated that the matter was under review with potential consequences for his custodial rights as a parent. Jack stood on the porch, reading each line twice, his jaw set, his breathing controlled in the way soldiers do when rage threatens to rise. He carried the envelope inside, laid it on the table, and called Laura. She arrived within the hour, her expression tight with recognition. "This is retaliation," she said, scanning the document. "They are laying groundwork to challenge your fitness as Emily's guardian. If they cannot silence you with intimidation, they will try to use the courts." Jack nodded slowly. "They are using the same tactic in 2 directions: paint me as unstable and isolate Emily from me." He glanced toward the living room where his daughter sat, drawing quietly, unaware of the legal maneuvers unfolding around her. "They underestimate how far I will go to protect her," he said. Laura placed a hand on his arm. "Then we respond methodically. We gather every piece of evidence to show this is fabricated." That evening, Jack received a call from Daniel Brooks. His voice strained. "Commander Carter," he began. "I have been placed on administrative leave, effective immediately." Jack's stomach tightened. Why, he asked. Daniel answered with weary resignation. They told me it was for conduct unbecoming, but I know what it is. Pearson found out I spoke with you. I've been ordered not to discuss the case, and I've been told that if I push back, I could face termination. Jack's grip on the phone hardened. You did the right thing, he said firmly. But this proves what Captain Richardson warned us. They are closing ranks. Daniel hesitated, then added, I wanted to testify if needed, but now I'm under a gag order. Still, I have copies of the notes I made. They cannot silence everything. Jack thanked him, his voice steady, though inside he felt the chill of recognition. The system was not simply defending misconduct, it was actively punishing honesty. After the call ended, Jack sat in silence for a long moment, then opened his binder and added 2 new entries, one for the fabricated allegation of threats, and one for Daniel's suspension. He wrote in careful block letters, knowing that every detail would one day matter. Days passed with pressure mounting. Jack noticed a marked patrol car parked down the street at odd hours, the officers inside not hiding their watchful presence. Emily grew restless, asking why police cars kept appearing near their house. Jack explained gently that sometimes people in authority made mistakes and tried to cover them, but he would not let anyone take her away. She believed him, but the shadow in her eyes deepened. At school, she grew quieter, her teachers sending notes home expressing concern about her withdrawal. Laura suggested this could actually work in their favor, as documented counseling sessions would show Emily's trauma was the result of the incident, not Jack's care. Jack agreed, though the thought of his daughter being reduced to evidence made his chest ache. Meanwhile, the fabricated allegations gained traction. Local news carried a short piece quoting unnamed police sources, claiming that a disgruntled veteran had made verbal threats against officers involved in a controversial shooting. The description was vague enough to avoid direct liability, yet specific enough for neighbors to connect the dots. Mrs. Wilson knocked on Jack's door one evening, her face lined with concern. I don't believe a word of it, she said. I saw the way you cared for Emily and Shadow. They are twisting things. Jack thanked her, grateful that at least some in the neighborhood recognized the manipulation. Still, he knew perception was a powerful weapon, and the department was wielding it effectively. Laura contacted several civil rights organizations sharing the binder and the video evidence. One group expressed interest, advising that the next step might involve federal attention. Jack welcomed the possibility, but understood that time was critical. The longer the fabricated narrative circulated, the more difficult it would be to undo. He also understood that Callahan's personal vendetta gave this campaign an intensity beyond routine corruption. Each maneuver was designed not only to silence him, but to break him. Late one night, Jack reviewed the footage of the confrontation in his living room again. He watched Callahan's smirk, Miller's threats, the careless admission that the truth is what goes into the report. He paused the video, staring at Callahan's face, remembering the desert years earlier when he had filed the report that ended the man's military career. The grudge had traveled across time and continents to arrive in his living room, and now it threatened his daughter's safety. Jack whispered to himself, "You brought the fight to my home. Now I will end it here." The following morning, he began preparations for the next phase. He contacted Captain Richardson through the secure channel she had given him, informing her of the fabricated allegations and Daniel's suspension. Her response was brief but significant. Expected. Document carefully. Network is larger than you think. Stay steady. Jack printed her words and added them to the binder. He then scheduled a meeting with a trusted journalist outside the county, someone Laura had worked with in past cases. The time had come to widen the circle of awareness to ensure the truth reached beyond the walls of Oak Ridge. Jack Carter spent the next several days combing through every file, every report, and every scrap of information he had gathered. His binder now contained documents, still photos, and transcripts of conversations. But as he reviewed the footage of Callahan and Miller once again, he noticed something that had escaped his attention before a patch briefly visible on the inside of Callahan's jacket as he leaned forward to adjust his holster. It was not a police insignia, but a circular emblem with a stylized oak tree encircled by the words Neighborhood Integrity Coalition. Jack froze the frame and studied it carefully, the name unfamiliar, but the implication clear. He printed the image and tucked it into the binder, marking it with a red tab. That evening, he brought the discovery to Laura, who had been preparing motions to counter the custody allegations. She frowned as she examined the photo. "This looks like a private organization," she said slowly. "Not an official police unit. If they are operating within Oak Ridge while overlapping with the police, that is dangerous." Jack agreed, recalling similar networks he had encountered overseas civilian groups that acted as enforcers for agendas no one admitted publicly. The next morning, Jack began investigating the Neighborhood Integrity Coalition. Using secure channels, he traced property records and nonprofit registrations. The group presented itself as a community association dedicated to preserving traditional values and protecting neighborhood stability. The language was coded but unmistakable. Its board members included retired officers, real estate investors, and several business owners. Digging deeper, Jack uncovered complaints filed by families who had recently left Oak Ridge under suspicious circumstances. Several were military households, some were minorities, and most reported being harassed by concerned citizens who questioned whether they belonged in the community. Jack realized with growing clarity that Callahan and Miller's actions were not isolated incidents. They were part of a coordinated strategy designed to intimidate families like his into leaving. He shared his findings with Captain Richardson in their next secure call. She was silent for a long moment before responding. "I suspected something like this, but I could never prove it. This group has influence. They use soft language publicly but intimidation privately, and they are protected by connections higher than local leadership." Jack asked connections, to whom Richardson's voice dropped lower. "There are whispers of a private security consultant advising them. His name is Victor Decker. He runs a company called Sentinel Solutions. On paper, they provide corporate security and training. Off the record, there are reports of ties to extremist networks." Jack remembered the name. Years earlier, he had encountered Decker in briefings, a former contractor who had built his reputation in volatile regions overseas. Rumors suggested he had cultivated alliances with fringe movements back home, groups that cloaked ideology in the language of patriotism. If Decker was advising the coalition, then this was no longer simply corruption. It was an organized campaign. Jack felt the weight of the revelation. He had prepared for a fight against two vengeful officers, perhaps even a compromised department, but now he faced a network with resources, strategy, and outside backing. That night, after Emily went to bed, Jack sat at the kitchen table with Laura. He spread the documents across the surface, showing her the emblem, the coalition's board, and the references to Decker's company. Laura listened intently, her legal mind already connecting dots. "This changes the framework," she said. "We can no longer argue this as misconduct by individual officers. This is systemic intimidation, potentially civil rights violations on a federal scale. If we document this properly, it will not just expose Callahan and Miller. It will bring down everyone shielding them." Jack nodded, though he knew the path would be perilous. The coalition had already tried to remove Emily from him. If they learned he had uncovered their network, their retaliation would escalate. 2 days later, Jack confirmed his worst suspicions. Through contacts from his military past, he obtained an internal memo from Sentinel Solutions signed by Victor Decker himself. The memo outlined community stability programs designed to advise local groups on security best practices. The language was vague, but one passage stood out. "Ensure consistent pressure on targeted households to encourage relocation. Coordination with law enforcement allies is essential." Jack read the words 3 times, the intent chillingly clear. This was a manual for coercion written in the polished language of consultancy, but designed to achieve the same results as open hostility. Jack closed the memo and stared at Emily's school photo on the refrigerator. The coalition wanted to frighten his daughter into silence to break her spirit until leaving Oak Ridge seemed like the only option. He whispered to himself, "They miscalculated. They thought they could frighten a soldier's child." His resolve deepened. He had faced organized cells in distant countries. He could face one here. He decided to adjust his strategy. Rather than only defending against retaliation, he would go on the offensive. He compiled a second binder, this one not just for evidence, but for strategy. He mapped out the coalition's members, their connections, and their vulnerabilities. He included Sentinel Solutions at the center, drawing a line directly to Victor Decker's name. As he closed the binder, he realized that this battle was no longer just about justice for Shadow, or even for Emily. It was about exposing a network that threatened countless families. Laura Carter had been working late nights for weeks, combing through public records, court filings, and archived complaints that most people would have overlooked. Her office was a sea of color-coded folders, each one marked with initials or case numbers. She cross-referenced names, dates, and incidents with the patience of someone who knew a single overlooked line could mean the difference between dismissal and accountability. One evening, she called Jack into her office, her eyes tired but burning with determination. "It is bigger than we thought," she began, pushing a folder toward him. "I traced the Neighborhood Integrity Coalition's funding sources. Several contributions come directly from accounts tied to city officials, including the mayor's discretionary fund. And look at this, Diane Mercer, the social worker who visited you, is listed as a consultant on one of their subcommittees." Jack leaned forward, reading the documents carefully. "So the people who tried to question my stability are not just misguided. They are part of the same network." Laura nodded grimly. "And it goes deeper. Complaints of misconduct against Callahan and Miller were consistently routed through the same internal affairs officer, someone who conveniently closed each case as unsubstantiated. That officer later received a promotion approved by the city council. We are not just dealing with rogue officers, Jack. We are dealing with an ecosystem designed to protect them." Jack felt the weight of the revelation settle across his shoulders. He had seen chains of corruption before in war-torn countries where official channels masked private agendas. The language was different here, more polished and bureaucratic, but the pattern was the same. "If the city is compromised, we cannot fight this locally," he said quietly. Laura agreed, her expression steady. "That is why I started preparing something larger. We need to bypass them entirely. We go to the federal level." Over the next several days, Jack and Laura worked side by side. He organized his binders into digital files, encrypting each set with military-grade security. She drafted a comprehensive legal summary outlining not just incidents, but patterns of systemic abuse. They included Mrs. Wilson's testimony, Daniel Brooks's notes, Captain Richardson's communications, and the Sentinel Solutions memo. Jack insisted on precision, reminding Laura that federal investigators would dismiss anything that seemed speculative. Every piece of evidence had to stand on its own merit. Emily, sensing the gravity of her father and aunt's work, stayed close by but quiet. She watched from the living room as Jack typed late into the night, sometimes bringing him tea or simply sitting nearby with her books. Jack recognized her presence as both fragile and strong, a reminder of why he fought and of the innocence he sought to protect. The turning point came when Laura uncovered a series of property transactions that revealed the coalition's ultimate goal. "They are not just about intimidation," she told Jack, showing him the deeds. "They have been acquiring properties at reduced prices after families were pressured to leave. The pattern is clear. Intimidate, devalue, acquire, and resell. It is profiteering under the guise of community integrity." Jack's jaw tightened. So Shadow's death was not just cruelty. It was part of a business model. Together, they prepared a dossier nearly 400 pages long. Jack burned multiple copies onto secure drives, each labeled and sealed. Laura wrote a cover letter addressed not to local authorities, but to the U.S. Attorney's Office and the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice. "We must anticipate resistance," she said. "Some will claim jurisdiction belongs here, but this is no longer a local matter. This is a civil rights case, a corruption case, and possibly organized crime." On a quiet Sunday morning, Jack drove to a secure courier service, his daughter's sketch of Shadow tucked into his pocket like a silent blessing. He handed over the package with calm precision, signing the necessary forms. As he walked back to the car, he looked up at the sky, remembering his military deployments. Sending intelligence to headquarters had always carried the same mixture of relief and risk. The message was out, but until reinforcements arrived, he and his team were exposed. Now his team was his family. That evening, Captain Richardson called with news. "I heard from a contact in the Bureau," she said. "They received something significant this morning. I suspect it was yours. Be ready, Jack. When federal authorities step in, those tied to the coalition will not go quietly." Jack listened, his resolve unshaken. "I have been ready since the day Shadow died," he replied. Laura sat across the table, reviewing her notes. "Now we wait," she said softly. Jack shook his head. "We prepare. Waiting is for those who trust the system. Preparation is for those who know how easily systems can fail." The knock on Jack Carter's door came at dawn, 3 weeks after Laura had submitted their dossier to the Department of Justice. When he opened it, he found not police, but 2 federal agents. Their identification badges held steady for him to see. The lead agent introduced herself as Marissa Cohen from the Civil Rights Division. "Mr. Carter," she said firmly, "we are here to inform you that a coordinated operation is underway. Your evidence was received, corroborated, and deemed credible. You and your daughter should remain inside this morning. By the end of today, Oak Ridge will look very different." Jack thanked her quietly, then closed the door and turned to Emily, who had padded into the hallway in her pajamas. "It has started," he told her gently, "and you are safe." Through the living room window, Jack watched as unmarked vehicles moved methodically through the neighborhood. Federal agents in dark windbreakers approached houses with calm precision, knocking firmly, producing warrants, and escorting out men and women who until now had operated with impunity. He saw Callahan led down the steps of his modest ranch home, his face pale and eyes darting no longer the swaggering officer who had mocked a grieving child. Miller was brought out of his apartment in handcuffs, shoulders slumped, the weight of inevitability heavy upon him. Across town, Laura texted Jack updates: the mayor had been arrested, the internal affairs officer removed in custody, and several business owners charged with conspiracy. Even Diane Mercer, the social worker who had questioned Jack's stability, was among those escorted away, her role as a coalition consultant no longer hidden. Emily sat beside her father, clutching his arm as the morning unfolded. "They are taking them all," she whispered, her voice carrying both awe and disbelief. Jack nodded, knowing that the operation represented not just arrests, but the dismantling of a structure that had thrived on intimidation. Hours later, Agent Cohen returned to provide an update. "We have taken 23 individuals into custody," she reported. "Charges range from civil rights violations to racketeering. The evidence package you provided, combined with financial records and testimony from insiders, allowed us to move decisively." Jack asked the question he had been holding in his chest. "Will Emily need to testify?" Cohen replied carefully. "Her testimony may not be necessary. Between the video recordings, Officer Brooks's cooperation, and corroborating witness statements, we have a strong case without placing additional strain on her." Relief crossed Jack's face, though he knew the process was far from finished. The trial began 3 months later in the federal courthouse, 2 counties away, chosen deliberately to avoid local influence. The courtroom was filled each day, reporters lining the benches, community members attending in quiet solidarity. Jack sat beside Laura, his presence steady but unobtrusive. Emily remained at home with a counselor during most sessions, shielded from the harsher details. The prosecution opened with the footage from Jack's hidden cameras played on large screens for the jury. The images spoke with undeniable clarity. Callahan and Miller inside Jack's home, their words arrogant and revealing their actions aggressive, their contempt for accountability laid bare. The room was silent as the recording ended, the truth no longer confined to Jack's binder, but presented for all to see. Next came testimony. Mrs. Wilson, dignified in her age, described what she had witnessed that terrible afternoon when Shadow fell. Her voice trembled at times, but her conviction never wavered. Then Officer Daniel Brooks took the stand, his career in jeopardy, but his conscience finally free. He detailed the falsification of reports, the threats he had received, and the moment he realized silence made him complicit. His honesty drew quiet nods from jurors, the weight of his sacrifice clear. Other families who had been pressured out of Oak Ridge also testified their stories, forming a pattern too consistent to ignore. Laura's legal strategy tied everything together. She demonstrated how city officials had funneled funds to the coalition, how property values had been manipulated, and how Sentinel Solutions had provided structured methods of intimidation. Victor Decker himself was named as an unindicted co-conspirator, his absence noted but his influence undeniable. The defense attempted to dismiss the case as a collection of misunderstandings and disgruntled voices, but the weight of evidence pressed down like stone. On the final day, the prosecution closed with words that echoed in Jack's heart. Justice is not achieved through force or fear. It is achieved when the truth is spoken, when systems meant to protect are held accountable, and when children like Emily Carter can walk their streets without terror. The jury deliberated for less than a day. When they returned, the verdicts were read one by one guilty on all major counts. Callahan's face hardened into bitterness. Miller wept openly. The mayor sat hollow-eyed as the reality sank in. The court ordered immediate custody pending sentencing. As the gavel struck, Jack exhaled a breath he had carried since the moment Shadow fell. Months later, life in Oak Ridge began to shift. Federal oversight committees were installed, and the coalition dissolved. Emily returned slowly to her routines, her laughter returning in small but precious bursts. On a bright autumn morning, Jack took her to the local shelter where she chose a young golden-coated puppy she named Bella. As the pup nestled into her arms, Emily looked up at her father and asked softly, "Do you think Shadow would be happy?" Jack smiled, placing a hand on her shoulder. "I think he would be proud you still have love to give." That evening, Jack sat on the porch while Emily played with Bella in the yard. The stars emerged one by one, the same stars Emily had once sketched with Shadow at her side. Jack reflected on the journey, loss, injustice, determination, and finally vindication. He had resisted the urge to fight with violence, choosing instead to arm himself with truth. And in the end, it was the truth that prevailed. This story reminds us that even in dark times, truth can shine through. What part of this journey did you connect with the most? Leave a comment with your thoughts and the place you're watching from. And if you haven't already, make sure to like the video and subscribe for more stories of courage and hope.